So, good evening. Welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight as we continue our 38th season here at River Styx at the Tavern. Well, actually, our 38th season of River Styx, our first season here at the Tavern. But thank you for joining us. Tonight we have two talented writers, Michael Nye, who used to be the managing editor of River Styx, who is now the managing editor of the Death Star that we know and love as the Missouri Review, who also has a new book of stories out. And then Alison Pelegrin, who also has a book out, or two books out, but a book that just came out, who we have also published a whole lot. Let's see, what else do we have? Oh, could I have our new issue? We also have The End of the World. So this new issue of River Styx, the End of the World issue, just came out a couple weeks ago, just in time for the end of the world, because it's going to happen, well, it's supposed to happen already, but it's going to happen again maybe in December, so get it while you can before the world ends. It has lots of good stuff. We also have, let's see, River Styx t-shirts, hoodies, poetry contest, and microfiction contest, flyers, CDs, and other assorted River Styx stuff. So without further ado, the last time we tried to bring Alison Pelegrin to our series, I received a phone call from her in the afternoon saying Continental Airlines got her as far as Dallas. And they could also get her to Chicago by 11 p.m., at least 2 hours after our reading was scheduled to end. So we are glad we can try again and bring her to our series, one of our favorite poets, to our podium. River Styx has published almost a dozen Alison Pelegrin poems over the years. We'd probably publish more, but her poems tend not to hang around the office very long. She enters our poetry contest almost every year, and usually within a week of receiving her submission, we receive a withdrawal letter notifying us that such and such a poem has been accepted elsewhere or won such and such a contest. And in a week, we receive another letter saying about the same thing. So usually there's like one poem left. Her subject matter runs from jackalopes to nutria, honky-tonks to homewreckers, to meditations on the Katrina tragedy, to Tabasco in space, plus odes to booze, Louisiana, pelicans, blue balls, FEMA trailers, and everything on this earth and under the earth like landfills, but especially the soggy and surreal earth of the Bayou State, and particularly in and around New Orleans. B.H. Fairchild, no stranger to this podium, and also the pages of River Styx, said on the back of a book he selected for the Akron Prize, Alison Pelegrin, quote, writes some of the jazziest, high-velocity, funny, serious, and, if I may say so without causing the keepers of the gates of high culture to wet their pants, entertaining poetry I have read in a long time, end quote. Alison Pelegrin is the author of 3 full-length collections of poetry, the Zydeco Tablets on WordPress 2002, Big Muddy River of Stars, which won the 2006 Akron Poetry Prize, and her newest, Hurricane Party, University of Akron Press 2012. Her poems have appeared in Plowshares, Poetry, River Styx, the Southern Humanities Review, the Southern Poetry Review, the Southern Review, and many other magazines on both sides of the Mason-Dixon. She is the recipient of fellowships from the Louisiana Division of the Arts and National Endowment for the Arts. She teaches English at Southeastern Louisiana University and teaches in Covington, Louisiana with her family. And if that's not enough, her 2 most recent poetry books have pictures in them to go with all those words. Please welcome to our podium one of my favorite poets, Alison Pelegrin.
Awkward silence. I didn't realize it would take me so long to get to the front. Thank you so much, Richard, for that introduction. One of the bad things is a good introduction like that means it's something I have to live up to, so hopefully I will. I'm so happy to be here. I tried to get here in February on Lundi Gras, and I couldn't. But the good news is that when they sent me back to New Orleans, I was on the plane with Willie Rofe, who was a New Orleans Saints Hall of Famer, just recently inducted, so I got to sit behind him. I didn't talk to him. I was too embarrassed. I'll just start to read now. I'm from Louisiana. We have parishes instead of counties. This is called In Livingston Parish, Dreaming of Li Po, who I'm sure you all know is the ancient Chinese poet, okay? I guess there's something I should say about this. I used to live on the Tickfaw River. Don't hold it against me. And there was a bar that we used to go to called the Prop Stop, and you could only get to it by boat. They always have wet t-shirt contests. They're probably having one right now. In Livingston Parish, dreaming of Lipo. Lipo, this is your invite to the Prop Stop. A honky-tonk unreachable except by boat, where we'd tether to a buoy and then, barefoot or in flip-flops, tightrope across a rug of skiffs, two weekenders not looking for trouble but ready to battle any slurs the hicks unleash. I keep samurai toothpicks and wine on hand, though little news and nothing but wild company braved the drawbridge to visit this distant post. Only a den of armadillos and dime-sized frogs that answer to your moon. Once a man broke through my yard with a wild turkey over his shoulder, but he didn't stop to talk. I later heard he was some houseboat squatter come ashore who uprooted a travel trailer, leaving behind an acre of shipyard squalor, red clay getaway and all. Which reminds me, lose the top knot and wear an orange vest. It's bow season, and I fear a wild pig, or worse, will discover you sleeping off pink Zinfandel in the palmettos. Always travel at night in a swarm of mist. If you send word, I'll take the four-wheeler and meet you at the property line. So everybody thinks it's the end of the world is coming where I live, and I just laugh. If that does indeed happen, my plan is not to be a survivalist like they are with all their guns, but just to go to the epicenter and end it all. I'm going to read now a poem that's in the End of the World issue of River Styx. It's called Provisional Minutes of the Last Meeting of the Society for End Times Preparedness. We gather here at this fish fry in the fireman's hall to say, I told you so. Outside these walls, the world of fools proliferates with their pregnancies and Mardi Gras and proms. If only they knew. If only they had listened as we swarmed this one last carnival in our daily dress as modest milk crate prophets wheeling crosses down Bourbon Street. If only one day-glow diva had dropped his riding crop and looked my way. Never mind the Gulf shrimp with no eyes, the rain of frogs, locusts dropping from trees, their melted wings fused like plastic. Sometimes you just know. Minus our leadership gone rogue, lips sinking at the cat's meow, we form a prayer circle, muttering what comes to mind, ending in wordless what-ifs that masquerade as a moment of silence. Survival will be lonely, sheltering in the safe house hills with your trucks and guns and sacks of rice. A reel for true apocalypse, with looters door to door like after a storm. Will it even be a storm or a whisper? Is it a haunting or an exorcism? Crows subtracting their shape from cypress trees crucified in brackish water. I remember the duck blind, practicing calls with my father as the world came to light. Now everything must go. I always thought it would happen in summer when the days are alike, but signs point to now. We will not meet again, so take the centerpieces home. I must decline your call to join the caravan to an undisclosed desert spot where we can watch the red sun sink in front of trees rather than behind and call it rapture. I have dreams that I am young again, a girl running through water chasing fish with a butterfly net. When I wake and see I'm trapped behind a silver flashing wall, I realize it's the street light glinting off stockpiled cans. I pray it's wisdom that holds me, draws me outside to the carnival of shadows for another look around. Respectfully submitted, by one who half believes. Now I'm going to read a poem called Homewrecker, and this is about something that happened to me in Livingston Parish, which is I was driving over this bridge, and then I had to back down the bridge because there was a house coming over the bridge that was being moved, and all these guys were riding on the top, kind of pushing the power lines out of the way, which seems so dangerous. And it just made me wonder what would cause you to move your house like that. This is called Homewrecker. You'll never see a diaper from me, whether I'm the baby's daddy or not. Just like your sister Janelle, on the pill and suddenly knocked up, giving it away, seducing me with sobs to cover for the river trash you're shacking with. Go on, go by your mamas and grow the little brat on dumplings and venison gumbo. Oh, to be a flea on the wall of your life. I'd pay to pass through Killian again and count the jokers you collect with 3 in diapers and a job sweeping hair at the gossip shop. You'll catch the breeze of 1,000 big rigs, I bet, dragging those potluck kids across the tracks to meet their relatives, no better than a salesman with a suitcase full of junk. This time, the truth is better than my fantasy. You sneaking home after a weekend spent pussyfooting on Trey's pontoon boat to find your clothes in garbage bags and a vacant lot where our trailer used to be. Around you, crew-cut kids circle on their bikes, all the while bolder as they pedal up the drive. It would have been easier to throw you out, but the prize for holding the harlot's card is more than being oops-a-daisy pregnant. It's stares that smack like sucker punches everywhere you go. It's standstill time and backstab talk, sweating you through errand trips to town. I hope you pass seasons peering through fingerprints on glass for the storm you know is coming and the man you know ain't. Nothing but worries walking in your mind. Well, worries and the thought of me at the wheel steering our trailer down the red clay drive and across the Tickfaw River. Ringmaster leading the biggest elephant in the parade. People thought it was a tornado, sirens and a double-wide speeding through the sky to land a new life in Ascension Parish. And really, where else could destiny deliver us? Come Friday, I'll be sniffing out fresh meat at the Bingo Palace while you hook up with the first redneck to listen to your barstool lies. I'll be swallowing the beekeeper's smoke, feeding dogs off your grandmother's dishes, bachelor again and king of all until I find me a new queen. Keep her inside, draping scarves over mismatched lamps. This is called Hurricane Party. No way in hell the sky would do me wrong. Even with the weatherman keening in his yellow slicker, it just doesn't sink in. Plywood, shrimp boots, sandbags, and booze. Stuck in line at the hardware store. Pancakes for dinner after schools close early. Before landfall, before the water comes and anyone gets hurt, it's always fun. Chanting the alphabet of named storms that never harmed besides a muck mosaic in the streets. The waterline's footprint, a jagged hem of leaves on the lawn. Taping the windows, packing for a midnight exodus, our map, the lava flow of headlights. In the car, pillows, a coffee can for pee, and Michael, row the boat ashore. The aggravation makes the worst you've heard seem not so bad. Not even boating from rooftop to rooftop after Betsy. Or Cousin Chancy in the crook of a tree, delivered by a voice speaking out of the light. Over here, this child, he cold. Is it chance? Or is God listening when I beg to be passed over? For someone to take my place, ripping up carpets and breathing the stench of minnows shriveled on concrete. Cameron Parish, Yucatan Peninsula, the whole of Florida, Dominican Republic. Apologies for the times my blessings have arrived at your expense. A feast of outage-thawed seafood, the easy work of peeling tape from crossed-off windows, each pane scraped clean a day the calendar is giving back. I try not to do this in public anymore, but I just couldn't help notice that so far in St. Louis, I have not seen any cars with testicles hanging from them. Does that exist in certain circles? Okay. I don't really mind them, I guess, personally, but my mother's this little old lady, and I feel like she shouldn't have to look at those when she goes to the grocery store. If the FBI ever takes my computer and looks at my search history, they'll see many things. And one of them will be this obsession with the testicles, which are called bumper nuts. They're called bumper nuts if you want to order them. And they're expensive, which I don't understand. But anyway. This is called blue balls. What else could it be called? With bumper nuts for dualies and monster trucks, who needs fuzzy dice or a dashboard Jesus? I prefer them life-size with baby names like Tenders or Jules. Something to cradle and protect, not sandbags dragging from Humvee convoys in Afghanistan. A gag gift, the new pet rock, Choco balls, bubblegum and lime, red-hot Tabasco balls with popping veins, camo balls for four-wheelers, and for breast men, awareness pinkies like cowbells to and fro from tow hitches in the Walmart parking lot. A desire rises in me. I want to get crafty, to get dirty on my knees, on my back, underneath, just like in high school, but with candle wax and a glue gun. Spangle them with glitter and sequins, and voila! Liberace balls dragging across speed bumps, leaving, instead of skid marks, sparkle in their wake. I feel so bad for you, big boys, hung with twin Christmas hams. Those things look like they hurt. I used to have a rabbit's foot keychain I rubbed for luck. Now there are bitty balls, pocket nuts swinging from the ignition, their whisper of a touch against my knee on all my travels. Is this what it's like to be a man? Is this what inspires one to raise the question on a t-shirt? Do you want to ride my fat boys? I bet you say that to all the girls. To the Hooters girls in gravel, tickling your pickup's manly flesh. Country boy in blue jeans, straddling the blue balls chained to your truck. What's wrong with this picture? Hint, hint, it's not your package. A sky blue rabbit's foot bulging through your Wranglers, but the other, that which must be cocksocked, tucked away on first dates and church picnics. Disco electric, neon hernia, baby daddy, ball and chain, bluebird of happiness, balls. This is called Dirty South. Am I untrue? Does it spit in the face of jazz and my treasured drawl if secretly I envy more civilized places with fewer drag races and racists? Up south, the bland lands, the oasis of the West, elsewhere, away from the chemical burn of refinery fires, out of reach of hurricanes. I want to shed this fear I have of snapping any second, no longer the rebel among rebel uncles. Ashamed their trigger-happy highs and lows double as my moods, sometimes I almost believe they're coon-ass premises. But I've oversimplified, maybe even lied about their good hearts, kind up front, and in a way, colorblind. If there were a tent, revival white, nearby, maybe I'd parade the aisle in a sweat, let them lay hands, let them tug the traitor out of me, rekindle raging loyalty instead. Perhaps it's time to accept my fate, renew my vows to the dirty South on nighttime's altar, its engine of insect noise. Hating would be easiest, but after all this time, I find my eyes adjusting to the light. At AWP this year, I stood in line to have a poet sign my book, and she wrote in it, Camille Dungy it was, and this is what she wrote in it, and I'm sure she says this to all the poets, but it felt like it was to me. She said, "May you find the words you need," and then signed her name and wrote it, and I don't know, I was so touched by that I wrote a poem. This is called The Words You Need. May you find the words you need. May you mutter in sleep, and may the talk run over into morning's pale skirts and steamed mirrors. May a madness possess your mouth, and may one day the curses lift, a sudden anthem of clouds revoked from the hypnotic, blinding sun. May you see cursive when you stargaze, words in the sand and words in the sound of the surf. When you open your mouth, let hornets swarm. In other words, may your insults sting. May you wake one day fluent in the bird song and the Arabic of scattered seed. Midwestern words aplenty should you desire to praise blackbirds pitching on tassels of corn, and a southern drawl when you need to bewitch. May God whisper in your ear God's name, the syllables shifting like an opal's hues. May you object with graffiti on the sides of trains. May you welcome the blues, words tattooed on your chest, unerasable psalms running the length of your scars. Curse like a sailor and let every breath be a prayer. May you witness cherry blossoms surrender, and in surrendering, utter an opera of sighs as the wind shudders through the leaves. May you be wise in the way of mystics who know that sometimes words are not enough, and who then welcome silence in the shadows of flowering trees. Now, I wasn't going to read this one, but Richard said Tabasco, so I thought I would. Do y'all know what Tabasco is? Do they have that? It's hot sauce? Okay. It's hot sauce that you put on stuff. And do you know what MREs are? Meals ready to eat. When a hurricane comes, this is what you get to eat instead of real food. And they're all different, and they come with, everything comes in the same color package, so you don't really know what you're eating. The peanut butter looks like the jalapeno cheese and things like that. But the chicken fajita ones come with Tabasco in little bitty Tabasco bottles. And that's one of the few things that I remember positively after Hurricane Katrina. This is called Tabasco in Space. I hear a generator buzz, I taste those days. Citronella swirled with cardboard meals and ice unlimited, and the welcome thrill of Katrina's king cake dolls. Half-ounce bottles of Tabasco packed with MREs marked chicken fajitas. People thought our food was special made, a little heat singing to the tongue of home, but I knew better. Long have the McElhenney been men in arms, and Tabasco has always traveled with them, from saddlebags to officers' tables to the final frontier. Tabasco in space, floating from the dripper to the spaceman's lip. What could be more American than a Yankee banker ruined by the Civil War comes south to make it big with pepper sauce? My worst job, worse than Taco Bell cashier, was at Hill Memorial, a special collections library, where it fell to me to tackle patrons fool enough to sneak a pencil in the reading room. Afternoons I worked behind the scenes, sorting donations, mostly major donor McElhenney stuff, his great-grands dumping crates of a rich life's ticket stubs and corsages. The librarians couldn't flat out refuse, which meant shelf space dog-eared in the stacks for resin hummingbird statuettes alongside Audubon's Wild Turkey, collectible most high, and print #1 in Birds of America. Protocol demanded white gloves, as on butlers of yore, be worn when turning the folio pages with tissue paper in between, meant to keep the reds from fading, red berries and beaks living mostly in the archived dark. They didn't end well, my library months. I got so tired of filing letters to the world, letters meant for home, the family Bible's apocrypha intercepted, transcribed, and shellacked. Moss Madonna decoupage, and photographs of slaves around the sugar pot, the children battling stillness so hard that in the aftermath, to history, they're just a blur. I wonder when they noticed my long, long lunch, my blazer left behind on its peg, work unfinished on the desk like an exhibit at the Gallier House, all but the threshold of the room roped off. If only I'd have thought to tease them with a prank, something harmless, like sharpening the golf pencils at both ends, little footprints, Tabasco bottles placed at random in the stacks, near Kingfish's windbag letters, between gilt books in cages, a fake collection, the Hot Stuff Chronicles, among its contents a list of non-food uses, Sentry Watch eye drops, cure-all for a sassy tongue. Tabasco released a C-ration cookbook as a joke. Somebody sent me one in a letter not long ago. Did they jest or fear I'd turn survivalist after a peek at my post-Katrina stash? So many ways to spend a mouthful of vinegar and smoke. Maybe I am crazy, awaiting the end of days, except for me and mine, who'll be hydrated and fed, dressed in desert fatigues, and off the grid. Thank you. Do I take the questions now or at the end? Do I take the questions now or at the end? No, okay.
So we are going to take a very short break. And don't forget that Alison has books of poems out yonder in the next room, sold with courtesy of Left Bank Books. And we also have the brand new End of the World issue. And I know we're all stoked for it. We can all know where to get our rations. So we'll see you in about 10 minutes. We'll be back up with Michael Nye.
Michael Nye said he's ready to read, so that means I'm ready to introduce him. My name's Adrian Matika. I'm the co-director of the River Styx series. I haven't been here this semester because I've been in Bloomington doing my thing there, but I'll be back in the spring. So it is a real pleasure to see you all here to support both Alison and Michael. It was a great reading, Alison, wherever you went. It was well worth the wait. She's right next to the bottle of wine, which I don't blame her at all. So, this is really, it's great to be able to introduce Michael. I ordinarily would have come up here with something half written and made up the rest of it based on things, but I couldn't do that with Michael because it's a little bit closer to me than that. So let me just read the back of the book stuff first. Michael Nye was born and raised in Cincinnati, Ohio, and attended the Ohio State University and the University of Missouri St. Louis, where he earned his MFA. His fiction and nonfiction have appeared in Boulevard, Cincinnati Review, Crab Orchard Review, New South, Red Cedar Review, Southwestern, and South Dakota Review, among many others. He was a finalist for the Catherine M. Porter Prize and nominated for a pushcart. All of that, right? This guy, I mean, we are in the presence of greatness. And as we all know, and I think Richard mentioned earlier, he used to be the managing editor of the finest journal in the land, River Styx, right? And now he works in the same capacity at a less prestigious, but more robustly funded journal, right? The Missouri Review. That is, at least until Tyler Perry swoops in and options strategies against extinction and replaces every main character with Medea. These are the facts. I'm working on that for you. So I've known for a while that I was going to introduce Michael, and I'm not going to lie, it made me a little bit stressed out. Michael and I have logged a lot of hours together, and along with Richard, he was my introduction to St. Louis, really. And he still is in a lot of ways, even though he bailed and moved to Columbia. Yeah. So I knew I wasn't going to be able to give this dude an objective introduction. So while I enjoyed strategies against extinction a great deal, and even if I hadn't spent my Sundays checking up three-pointers with this guy, I would have liked it anyway, so take it as a relatively unbiased opinion. I know how hard Michael worked in this book, and I know how much effort it took to get it into the world. It's really important every once in a while just to stop and sit with that for a second. And here's the other thing. Michael is the epitome of that old book by its cover cliche, right? If you met Michael outside of the auspices of the literary scene, I don't think that you would imagine he's a writer. I think you might imagine that he was the president of the Young Republicans Club. Sorry. But as far as I know, he never held that office. And since Republicans can't play basketball, one might assume Michael. Sorry. One might assume Michael was in the basketball gym on his way to play squash, or that he had just gotten lost on his way to the Cedar Room for a cigar and a snifter of brandy. I'm clowning, of course. I mean, it takes more than a short haircut to be a Republican. And more than that, Michael has a kind of swag that belies all of the stereotypes that I just listed. See, ball players know other ball players. It's hard to explain to civilians that don't play basketball, but when you see someone who plays basketball as a ball player, you can tell. They have a kind of way they carry themselves. In the immortal words of Jay-Z, check out my swag, yo, I walk like a ball player. No matter where you are what you are, player. You are what you are, player. As great as that statement is, something about it implies that we can't change ourselves. Fortunately for us, Michael writes in willful opposition of Jay-Z's statement. The stories and strategies against extinction are full of characters who are concerned with who they are, sometimes in relation to who they once were, other times in relation to who they want to be. You are who you are, player. In Michael's stories, we meet out-of-work lawyers, convicts, radio announcers, and divorcees, and Michael is clearly none of these things. Or maybe he's all of them, and we haven't spent enough time looking at him as clearly as we should. Check out our swag, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Michael Nye.
I do kind of dress Republican, don't I? Man, that's rough. This is so wonderful to see so many of you here. I'm looking at former students, former interns, mentors, basketball players, fellow writers, fellow graduate students, board members. This is a really full room of warm faces from the last decade, and it's good to be home. So thank you all so much for coming tonight, and of course to Richard and Shaney for putting this on, for making this the finest reading series in the city. Thank you. I go on and on about Richard tonight, but I don't want to embarrass him. He's probably too drunk now to care. So I'm just going to get into it, and I'm going to try out a new story on you tonight that is not in the collection. This doesn't need any introduction whatsoever, so I'm just going to dive right in. This is called Beauty in the Age of Chaos and Savagery. Denny Birdwell was 39 years old and retired from the National Football League for almost 4 years when he was arrested in the produce section of Whole Foods Market in St. Louis, his hands covered in the remaining pulp and mush of the fruit he had spent the last 12 minutes smashing. Later, he insisted he had no memory of it. The last thing he did remember, he told the police, was driving into the parking lot. It had been a hot September day, and he had the windows of his pickup truck rolled all the way down so that he could feel the breeze as he cruised around the city. He vaguely recalled getting out of the truck and getting a shopping cart. "And that's it?" the officer asked. Bertie nodded. His massive forearms rested on his thighs, and he studied his hands as if they held a book, and the explanation for his behavior was written in clear periodic sentences. Flipping his hands flat, he curled his fingers into his palms, feeling the arthritic tug on his knuckles. Maybe when he started, he had been thinking of the white envelopes. "Gave us a good scare," the officer said. "We were thinking about shooting you." Bertie laughed. "No, I'm dead fucking serious." "What about a taser? A guy your size, covered in mashed fruit and screaming at the top of his lungs?" Bertie tried to imagine it. As an ex-lineman, he knew that his enormous size made rooms feel smaller, ceilings seem lower, and when not smiling, his expression was one of ferocious intensity. He was the type of man who scared people when he ate in restaurants. So while no one knew what he smashed first, when he lifted a watermelon over his head like a sacrificial offering to God, then slammed it down, spraying the yawningly suburban shoppers with seeds and pulp, they saw him as a thing of enormous size to be feared. At that time, according to the statements of 5 witnesses, Bertie's face was already covered with mashed bananas. "I'm sorry," Bertie said. "I get these headaches." "Yeah, you already said that. Lucky that you passed out. You just stopped moving and then collapsed." "I hit my head," Bertie said, more to himself than anything. On cue, the lump forming behind his ear began to throb. What would Natalie think of this? "Am I free to go?" "You posted bail. Toxicology is clean. Whole Foods isn't pressing charges. Store manager is a Mizzou grad. But the district attorney still might bring charges against you. If you don't have a lawyer, I suggest you get one." The last lawyer Bertie had spoken to was his divorce attorney, a man named Oberschmidt, who seemed more interested in funding local nightclubs and marginally talented musicians than practicing law. Bertie hoped he still had his number. "Mind if I call a cab?" "Phone's right there," the officer nodded. "By the way, can I trouble you for an autograph? My son plays football. Right tackle. Huge fan of yours." Bertie smiled. Of course he'd sign an autograph for one of the cops who arrested him. Absolutely. Forever he would be the ex-athlete. And 20 years of being an athlete reinforced this one fact. The public would tolerate anything. After he retired from the NFL, Bertie had been a realtor at House of Brokers, where he was on a quote-unquote team with 2 other realtors who didn't entirely resent him because the name recognition of Dennis Birdwell, All-American at Mizzou, Pro Bowler with the Rams, brought business into their offices, even when the clients quickly discovered that Bertie was there mostly to shake hands and pose for pictures. His real estate sign showed Bertie with a football tucked under his left arm and his right arm extended, the Heisman pose, all while wearing a dark gray suit, clean white shirt and black tie, his face beaming in an aw shucks smile. Waiting for clients at the curb of some house, he always stood studying this ridiculous sign, his new life distant and unrecognizable. He quit after 9 months. He signed out of the police station and directed the cab to the parking lot of Whole Foods. It was night, dark and muggy, and his body creaked as he exited the cab. He stared at his pickup truck, and the idea of driving was exhausting. He wished he could have Natalie pick him up, but, of course, she was 12 years old. Not much help there. He climbed into his truck and turned the ignition, the bones in his neck and shoulders rattling like dice. At 1 a.m, his street was laconic. No barking dogs, no children playing, every porch light off, all the houses and yards as still as gravestones. Natalie would have gone to bed hours ago. Perhaps her father would have answered, a tall, serious-looking man whose face always seemed to be in shadows. Bertie had never spoken to him. He pressed his thumb against his right ear until he heard the cartilage pop. The idea of explaining himself to Natalie's father sent a fresh wave of nausea up his throat. He opened his front door, sat down on his couch, and promptly fell asleep. "What do you have to eat?" Natalie asked. There she was, just inside his front door. Tall, with midnight dark hair and impossibly blue eyes, a smattering of freckles across the bridge of her nose like a cluster of distant stars. Even at her height and the curves in her hips and chest beginning to show, she seemed impossibly young. Her expression was wry and knowing, and she leaned against the doorframe as if she had seen this scene 1,000 times before. Perhaps she had. I don't know, whatever's in the fridge. Can we order pizza? Are pizza orders in the fridge? She folded her arms and stared down at him. Why did you sleep in your clothes? I got arrested. For what? Mashing fruit. You're funny, she said without humor. So you have nothing to eat? She turned her head so he couldn't see her expression as she took in the bareness of his living room. 2 black leather couches and a matching recliner, a massive flat-screen TV along the far wall, a wide and low glass coffee table, carpeting that was both new and bland, and white walls decorated with 2 paintings of generic landscapes that Bertie had picked up at a yard sale after his wife left him. The blinds were half drawn, and through the windows, the outside world looked so much more inviting and secure than his home. His headache was muted, manageable, but he couldn't remember what day of the week it was. He ended up ordering a large pizza, breadsticks, and a couple of 2-liters, and they sat at the table on the smooth slab patio in his backyard. Bertie remembered how at one time he liked to eat an entire extra-large pizza with the works and drink a 6-pack of beer all by himself. Bertie listened as Natalie told him about school, how algebra was going, and that it actually made quite a bit of sense to her. Western Civ class in the French Kings, smoothly leading into her practicing her French. He placed his 3rd slice of pizza on the plate, the pepperoni and mushrooms sliding off the cheese. His fingers trembled. Bertie turned up his palm, curious at the source of this sudden tremor, as if there might be something at the end of his now numb fingertips. A surge of heat ran through both his arms. He leaned back in his chair. Sweat poured down his ribcage. Bertie, are you okay? Her voice sounded far away, like a distant echo in the woods. He blinked, then again, then rapidly. He stood, shoving the metal chair back. I'm certain, Bertie said, that Grover Cleveland was the 22nd president. Above, clouds rippled across the sky, his voice an indecipherable roar in his ears. Everything went dark. When he opened his eyes again, a face looked down at him. His mouth was heavy and dry, the distinct texture of grass tingled against his calves, arms, the back of his neck. A hand moved across his chest. Jesus, Natalie said, are you alive? I'm alive. Her face came into focus, her eyes first, then the entire face. What happened? You passed out. You're okay, Bertie. You're lying down right now. You're in your backyard. Do you know where that is? Overland, Ridgewood Court. Can you sit up? Yeah, but not yet. He relaxed, his head easing into the ground like burying his head into a pillow on a Sunday morning. His mouth was dry and he closed his eyes, waiting for the spinning to stop. What happened? She asked. That just happens sometimes. You say shit about presidents? Bertie opened his eyes again, rolled to his right, and pushed himself to his feet. Want to see something? Should you be standing right now? He headed toward his house without waiting for her, the pins and needles sensation shooting through his legs and back just like a goal line stand. He pushed the sliding door aside, lumbered to the front room, and flipped through stacks of caseless DVDs. The couch sighed, the leather puckering. Want me to call a doctor? I want to show you something. He lifted the disc he'd been looking for up to the ceiling, peering at it like a miner, making sure he held true gold in his fingertips. Then he popped it into the machine and sat down on the couch across from Natalie. He sensed she was looking at the side of his face, and he continued to stare at the screen until she turned her head and followed his gaze. That's me, he said, number 76. This is my sophomore year. You were all Big 12 that year. Bertie nodded in confirmation, newly aware that she had, at some point, memorized his biography. He scanned ahead to the third quarter, his Missouri Tigers down by 3 points against Texas Tech. He found the play. It was a power O, Birdwell kicking out and sweeping behind the center and right guard, firing into the line and seeking out the linebacker. Perfect footwork, dancing behind the line with those feet that rose and fell with the speed of a piston. Birdwell following that linebacker, that fullback's block into the crease, seeking to crack the first defender that makes the mistake of attacking the gap, usually a linebacker. He rocketed him, slamming his forearms and helmet right into the backer's numbers, blasting him out of the play. It was execution with the kind of military precision that made line coaches, assistant coaches, head coaches, and the head coaches, whose faces were always demanding, unsatisfied, and angry, shine with delight. This play always amazed Bertie. He can hardly be seen. The camera was centered on the running back, a kid named Worthington, who was at this point in the secondary on his way to a 47-yard touchdown. Bertie was barely in the frame. His man, the linebacker, was defeated, back on his heels, out of the play, and in frustration, he swung his left arm and batted Bertie upside the head. It isn't much of a hit. Bertie got hit harder than that on almost every play from scrimmage. In football, this was almost like a love tap. Even though he now knew concussions are often this way, the last of a series of repetitive slams to the head, something about this seemed wrong. Maybe it was the way he saw it on a television monitor, because the last thing he actually remembered about this play was seeing Worthington juking a cornerback. Then there was a series of scattered memories of vomiting in the locker room, bright lights shining down on him as he lay horizontal, the mechanical hum of the sliding doors of a hospital. Only 2 days later, with his then girlfriend sitting next to him, did the headaches and dizziness begin to make any sense. On film, Bertie stumbled forward, his legs turning to jelly, his knees collapsing, and then he is falling, his arms still and defenseless against his body as he tumbled to God's green grass. He dropped like a man who has nothing inside him, no organs, no muscles, no soul. He was out of the picture. There was no footage of what happened to him next. The running back, the touchdown, the obligatory shot of the crowd roaring with delight, painted faces screaming, fists pumping the air, joy all around. It was like Dennis Birdwell never existed at all. The next day, they were in the backyard with the football clutched between her long, slim hands. She pointed them at Bertie. Laces turned skyward, her bony knees bent, right foot slightly in front of the left, so that when Bertie screamed, "Hike!" she was already in perfect position to pivot and explode out of the crouch, spinning and pushing off her feet, arms extended as if to hand the ball off. Then she pulled the ball back to her body, crouching at the waist to sell the fake, and she sprinted out to her right, head and eyes high, both hands on the football until she pulled her right arm back and, still in a dead sprint, fires a perfect spiral, her hand turning in and the thumb down, the throw laser straight as it jets the length of Bertie's yard and ricochets right between the 8 and the 4 he had painted into the center of the plywood. The wood shuddered, rocking the homemade scarecrow back, the football bouncing off and hanging in the air for just a moment, then falling into the yellow grass, skipping once, twice, 3 times before rolling to a soft, silent rest. She puffed out her cheeks, her freckles more visible then, and trotted back to the pile of footballs. She worked out in a training bra she didn't need, her upper body all bones, and more than once, Bertie marveled at how such undefined muscles could rifle a football through the air like a pro. Her legs were perhaps the key. Her quads and calves bulged with the ropey muscles of a soccer player. For weeks now, Bertie had been training Natalie to be a quarterback, and it seemed no one noticed or cared that a 39-year-old ex-football player spending all his free time with a 12-year-old girl. Why she had asked him to tutor her he didn't know or couldn't remember. This relationship was a mystery he preferred not to solve. He glanced across the yard, waiting for a ripple of movement from the windows or door that he knew he would never see. Her father's name suddenly came to him, Oliver. He couldn't recall her mother's name. What did it matter? They were never home. Overhead, the sunlight slipped in and out of fast-moving clouds. Bertie's head ached, but it was the kind of ache he had learned recently not to fear. This was the ache of standing on his surgically repaired knees for too long. He thought of the white envelopes. When they were done, Bertie lifted the plastic garbage can and carried it to the scarecrow. He and Natalie filled it with footballs, and Bertie carried it to his garage and put it up against the far wall. "Plans tonight?" he asked her. She shrugged. "A bunch of us are going over to my friend Mallory's. We have a game early tomorrow morning. You make sure you get your rest." "I will, Bertie. I know I partied too hard when I was playing ball. Did I tell you about when I played hungover in college and had vomit down my jersey the whole time?" She made that face that teenage girls made at teenage boys, a pleasant combination of being grossed out and intrigued by what was just said. "I promise I won't vomit on myself." She placed her hands on her hips. "You should come. Game's at 9:30 in Clayton. It's not far from here." "Maybe." He always said maybe. "We'll see." He watched her run out across his yard and up to her house, pull the sliding door open and disappear. This was a neighborhood of ranch houses, and though Bertie had never been inside her house, he assumed that the layouts of the two places were exactly the same. He wondered if her house had the same college dorm room smell. Inside, his answering machine blinked. Bertie tapped play and listened as an associate of Oberschmidt's introduced himself, said he was proud to represent Dennis Birdwell. Give him a call, let's make an appointment, etc. He listened to it 3 more times, waiting for some sort of feeling about his legal problems. When none came, he walked to the fridge, opened it, and stared at the Brita pitcher and the milk and the baking soda that wasn't doing a particularly good job of concealing the smell emanating from the fridge he hadn't cleaned in months. He closed the door and got a drink of water from the tap. He guzzled it down twice, then leaned against the counter with his big forearms folded across his chest. Bertie made a pot of coffee and took a mug to the kitchen table. He considered his kitchen what a bad selling point it would be. A small room with barely enough space for the rectangular table he was sitting at, wallpaper of yellow flowers on the walls, appliances that were 20 years old, no counter space, something he had once considered important only to housewives. He flipped on the radio and listened to the Cardinals game. All the lights in his house were off. Bertie sat sipping coffee, listening to baseball, then the postgame, then the late-night sports show, drinking his calorie-free and non-alcoholic beverage, looking at his massive hands as they raised the mug to and from his lips, the fingers gnarled and swollen. He thought of Natalie throwing a football, a quarterback trapped in a girl's body, and wondered if he'd be alive this time next year. Bertie drove his pickup truck to a house he was renovating in the Shaw neighborhood of St. Louis. Tower Grove North was not quite dangerous, but not quite safe either, an area ripe for buying low and a place where Bertie could work by himself at his pace. And when the work was done, he could sell the house himself. No rush, no worry, no uptight yuppies asking him about square footage or heating bills or the school districts or any other shit that Bertie couldn't care less about. Still, there were times he regretted quitting the last job. He tried. He really did. But he couldn't remember when to come into the office. He couldn't remember when to show up for an open house. He couldn't remain smiling and patient for 6 hours at a time. After years of football and being told what to do and where to go, every minute of his life scheduled by coaches who were more tyrants than teachers, it was nice to choose not to do something. But here was always a reminder that he did eventually need to finish and sell each and every rehab. The white envelopes holding the letters from the NFL denying his disability claim and the early pension he desperately needed. Just thinking about those white envelopes from the league infuriated him. The way the logo was so prominent and perfect in the upper left corner, fonts with his name and address all immaculate. Even the quality of the white envelopes seemed extraordinary in their brightness and durability. Every time he'd hold one in his hands for a beat too long because maybe this was the time that we read all the medical forms and finally admit that yes, Dennis Birdwell's medical condition was unquestionably due to 14 years playing in the National Football League, only to open the envelope and once again be denied disability coverage. Natalie sat on the porch. He worked in the kitchen. The hours passed. It was now stripped to its bones, all the old cabinets and counters and broken appliances visible atop the large dumpster at the edge of the backyard. When the ache in his body became too much, he stood, his body popping like it was carbonated. He looked out across the overgrown weeds, imagining all the things he might find out there: bottles and cans, cigarette butts, used condoms, fast food wrappers, odd bits of clothing, if he ever bothered to walk into the backyard, but he preferred it uninviting. These headaches were never gone, just lying dormant like a volcano, the pressure building at the base of his skull or behind his eyes. And then came a great emptiness of time that could last hours or even days, and Bertie would wake up on the floor somewhere and not have any memory of the pain and confusion he had just gone through, and not remembering only made it more terrifying. He stepped out onto the porch. Natalie was sitting cross-legged on the concrete, a history book open on her lap. She looked up at him with blank curiosity. "Did I ever tell you about when I almost drowned?" he asked. She shook her head. He eased his body down onto the steps, his hips popping loudly, an electric snap of pain running from his skull to his ribs. He closed his eyes and clenched his jaw. "Bertie?" He brushed invisible crumbs from his thighs. "We were in Chicago, November, rainy and real fucking cold. You know how you see linemen on TV and we aren't wearing sleeves? We really are cold. I don't care what anybody says, how tough we pretend they are. We're fucking cold." Natalie closed her book. So there was this fumble, he continued. Ball hit the ground, you could actually hear it plop, like throwing a big rock in a small lake. The field looked like shit, like a pig pen. Dead grass and mud, and it was rainy and foggy. Nobody could see anything. Anyway, so the ball's loose, and I get to it first. And pylons are the worst goddamn thing in football. They're just fucking miserable. Guys are punching and grabbing fingers and wrists and twisting. If you get a hand in someone's mask, you try to gouge his eyes and bend his nose. You get a hand in that mask, you bite that son of a bitch. I'm serious, you take the flesh off if you have to. Anyway, so I got to the ball first. I got buried at the bottom of this pile, and my face was all the way into a puddle. I couldn't breathe. I was snorting water. I couldn't even scream. I opened my eyes, and all I could see was black. I kicked, and I pushed with everything I had, but nobody moved. When I tried to raise my head, this pain ran through my neck, all the way down through my spine, like a nail had been driven through it. I mean, I lived, obviously, but I fucked something up in my neck, and they took me out of the game. I played the next week, though. Natalie lowered her chin. Finally, she said, "I hate the water. I can't even swim. My mom used to swim." He thought, please remember me when I'm gone. But he was terrified to say this aloud, to admit that he was scared, that he needed her, his only friend, to make sense of his days. Instead, all he said was, "I don't think I've ever met her." Really? Neighbors often don't know each other. It's okay. My mom isn't home much anyway. He wrapped his fingers over his knees. Marriage is hard. I was never good at it. My first wife remarried. She has 2 kids. My second wife was more of a party girl. We don't really talk anymore. Sounds lonely. He chewed on that word like it was flavorous gum. The street was empty of cars, and Bertie looked up at the smoky sky. Was there really any difference between lonely and alone? It was Halloween. This year, the holiday fell on a Saturday, and Bertie could sit at home watching movies, rocking up and out of his recliner when the doorbell rang. Kids appeared in a wide range of costumes, from ghosts to superheroes to princesses to Harry Potters to the occasional kid who didn't wear any costume, just showed up with a pillowcase looking for candy. Bertie didn't mind this. At the door, Bertie smiled at the kids, terrified of his size. Way out, far away at the edge of his dark lawn, parents stood on the sidewalk, hands in their pockets, wearing stocking caps. He couldn't tell if they were smiling or not. Shortly after 8, he dumped all the remaining Milky Ways equally between 2 kids, then stood with his hands in his pockets on his plain concrete porch. All down the street, porch lights illuminated the decorations in the front yards. Dry ice in plastic cauldrons, scarecrows thrown back into lawn chairs, cobwebs on lampposts and windows and gardens, cheap signs reading "Happy Halloween." Behind the shades of living room windows, neighbors that he did not know settled in for the evening. Inside his house was nothing he wanted. An empty kitchen, a bathroom filled with various pain meds shipped from foreign countries, and littered all throughout, those white envelopes from the League, all saying the same thing over and over again: denied, denied, denied. On the other side of his driveway, appearing almost like a ghost, was Natalie's dad, Oliver. He nodded. Hands in his pockets, Bertie crossed the driveway and stood on their interstitial strip of the lawns. Oliver wore a barn coat and jeans and looked cold. What did Natalie go as this year? Shit, I don't know. She and Missy moved out. All the air left his lungs. What? 2 days ago, my wife bolted in the middle of the week. You didn't notice? Bertie stared at his shoes. How long had it been since he saw Natalie? After he took her to the house in Tower Grove, she hadn't come around again, but when was that? Trying to count days and weeks only made his neck ache. I think I saw her the other day. I think. Man, shit, Oliver, I'm really sorry. Oliver looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and pity. He sniffed and then spit into the grass. You really didn't notice my daughter was gone? Bertie raised his head and focused on some distant point over his neighbor's left shoulder. He could hear the threat, the low snarl in Oliver's words, the same tone that coaches used, barely masked disdain. I get these headaches, Bertie said. His eyes glassed over and his breathing echoed in his ears. I can get through the day, but the little things, big picture stuff, sometimes I just lose track. Oliver nodded and his squint soon relaxed into something like indifference. They stood quietly like that for a long time. Then he asked, how many surgeries have you had? 34. It's a lot of time under the knife. Some were minor, some were major. No big deal. Played safety in high school. Wasn't any good, though. I always seemed to fuck up the timing of the pass. Always way early or way late. Whatever. You want to come in and watch a late game? Only after Bertie accepted and started to follow Oliver into the house did he realize how strange this was. But he also recognized loneliness. Inside, the warmth of the house reminded him that, yes, it really was after sundown, almost November, and it was actually quite cold. Though this house was a ranch with a chain-link fence just like Bertie's, he recognized that Oliver had an immaculate home. The hardwood floor shined, its surface unscratched and gleaming. There was crown molding and artwork Bertie didn't understand but knew was tasteful, and expensive furniture, a fireplace that even probably worked. The kitchen, Bertie knew, would make his old clients salivate. Granite countertops, custom cabinetry, stainless steel appliances. Beautiful home, Bertie murmured. You sound surprised. I guess I just figured it would be like mine. Oliver didn't comment on this, and for that, Bertie was grateful. They sat down on the couch, and on the massive flat screen in front of them was a college football game. It was just the first quarter. They could be here for a while. Oliver offered a beer, and Bertie accepted, and they watched the game in silence. Occasionally, Oliver would ask a question, and Bertie would explain what was happening on the line, blocking schemes where the mistakes were made, point of attack. Kind of sounds like the Army, doesn't it? Bertie said. It's exactly the same. Bertie nodded. He had thought more than once that his coaches would have been better off fighting wars. Tear men down, build men up, nothing ever good enough. Something about Oliver's words, though, finally seeped into Bertie's mind, making him turn and look at him in profile. What war were you in? Desert Storm. No shit. Oliver nodded, never turning his eyes on Bertie. All of a sudden, as if by magic, Bertie could see the crow's feet around his eyes, the subtle sagging of skin around his jaw. Oliver was older than he realized. Armed division, Oliver said. Tanks, you know. Bertie nodded. Somehow, in a way he recognized but could not understand, he knew that this was not something he could ask Oliver about. What do you do now? I'm a dentist. Bertie laughed. I'm sorry, that's funny to, why a dentist? I don't know. Why not, I guess. It's actually pretty solitary. You don't deal with people much and you get paid really well. I didn't know that. Which part? All of it, I guess. Bertie's vision flickered and he gazed at some point above the television. Did you know the state can have up to a year to prosecute you for a crime? Missouri's statute of limitations is a full year. Can you imagine having something like that hanging over your head for a year? No, I can't. Bertie could feel Oliver's gaze drilling into the side of his head. I tore up a grocery store. I didn't hurt anybody. I mean, that's what the cops told me. I don't really remember it. Yeah, you get headaches. I never laid a hand on anyone. I mean, since I left football. Yeah, I think I always knew that. Bertie's breathing came hard, and he sensed that Oliver knew something, some kind of secret, a secret that could only be told in a language Bertie couldn't understand. Oliver asked, "What do you do now for work?" "Real estate. It sucks." Oliver pointed at the television screen with his beer bottle. "Better than that shit, though, isn't it?" On screen, it was 3rd and 2. USC on offense called an inside handoff. They might have made it. When the officials came out to measure, the replay was shown again and again from various angles. The sky cam high above, then from both sidelines. Even a view so inside the play it seemed there must be a player literally wearing a camera. Each and every shot showed young men, eyes aflame with adrenaline and testosterone, and then they hit, and their bodies shook, and their faces disappeared behind helmets and pads and piles of bodies. Bertie clenched his teeth together. God damn, I miss it. It's hard not to, isn't it? Bertie pictured Natalie. He pictured her running in full sprint, both her small hands on the football, her eyes up, her face compressed into this look of total concentration. It was really quite beautiful. He couldn't help feeling the beauty of that moment. Yet even in the reverie of such a beautiful thing that he'd helped to nurture, it saddened him that he didn't have his own daughter to think of, that he didn't think of his own family, that he couldn't picture anything other than football. Now he looked away from the television at the screen door, open and letting in the cold air and all the darkness out in the backyard. He thought about things he could not see. about darkness, about being face down at the bottom of a pile of savage men paid to tear each other apart, down beneath all those slabs of muscle and bone, down, sinking into the earth. Thanks. Nice timing.
So, do you two writers want to come up here? I wasn't kidding when I said you had to answer some questions. So, I'll kick things off. I'm curious. First of all, the first question goes to Michael Nye. As an editor, reading a lot of submissions day in and day out, I'm curious how that affects your own work. You want to talk in here? That's fine. Yeah.
Richard and I often talked about what we call the Grandma That Trooper story, and all kinds of other stories that are very familiar to anybody that reads a lot of submissions. You see very similar theme stuff over and over again, a cancer story, My Crazy European Summer, that kind of a story. And so what reading all these submissions does is it just makes you think of what is something I've never seen before? What is a story I've never seen before? And so from what I read tonight, I often find that thinking about the condition that people are in that don't have much seems to get lost, that a lot of the stories we get at magazines tend to deal with academics or middle-class people, and I'm always looking for something a little bit different, and it always starts with a new character. So hopefully that helps.
You're not an editor, Alison. Do we have questions from the audience that we would like to ask? This is your golden opportunity to ask the writer anything. Really? Last time we had like a bazillion questions.
So are you from Louisiana?
Yes.
You're born there?
Yes, I was born and raised in New Orleans.
And so have you been on the bayou, and so are some of these stories true to life for you?
Yes. Most of the men in my family were either shrimp fishermen or they were offshore welders. So low class or working class, I guess.
It's such a big room, but it's such a quiet room. Are there more questions for our two writers? Then go.
How did you decide what you're going to read this evening, both of you?
Okay, I'll go first. I always have a set list when I come in, but then I always depart from the set list. I wasn't going to read Tabasco in Space, but Richard mentioned Tabasco in the introduction, so I was sure to read that. Blue Balls wasn't on the set list, but I just put it back on.
We're glad you did.
Well, thank you. But you can tell what the audience is responding to with poetry, so it's a little different. If it gets quiet for a few minutes, I know to change the tone with the next piece. So to me, as long as the poet isn't taking too long shuffling through the book, it's okay. Okay.
I was thinking about that story this weekend because I'd been working on it, and I printed up a copy to take with me for Thanksgiving. I'm on my way to see my family in Cincinnati tomorrow morning. One of the advantages that a poet has when she gives a reading is that she can always add a poem or subtract a poem depending on how things are going. Short story writers don't have that advantage. And when I read with other people, they're funnier than I am. And I only have one semi-funny story in my book, and I've read that story 3 times in the last 6 weeks. It's a story called Sparring Vladimir Putin. So I didn't want to read that again. And then I also don't like reading something that there's a chance most of you have heard before. And I actually got a little assistance from a law student in the audience on that story to get some of the details right. So I thought that might be a nice thing to read, and just try something different, right? I mean, anyone can pick up a copy of the book, but only the people in this room have had a chance to hear that story so far. I thought that'd be a nice nod to all of y'all. So, you like that, y'all?
Are there more questions? All right, well then, I guess we're done. I'd like to remind you all that January 21st will be our next reading. We're going to take the holidays off. The third Monday of December will all be like opening presents or watching sports or hiding from the family. But in January, we'll be featuring Jennifer Kronevet and Allison Hedge-Koch. That will be the third Monday of January. We would also like to thank Michael Nye, Alison Pelegrin. We would like to thank Missouri Humanities Council for helping us support the series and our podcast, which you can find online. We would like to thank Left Bank Books, who will be selling books by both of our writers tonight. We would like to thank Tavern of Fine Arts for letting us do this for 3 months. And then, of course, we would like to thank you for coming. See you all next year.